recording the seminar routing.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and put in smart. We'll go ahead and get started. So, this is Dr. Brigham from the University of Regina. They're all the way up here today to do this presentation, which is super exciting for us. He's a professor in the biology department at the University of Regina. The students have been addressing questions that have bats and nightjars, filter and hibernation to save energy during periods of low food availability. We also have students studying ecology and endangered birds and mammals to understand movement before it could try and reverse the population decline. He's co-authored over 200 peer-reviewed publications, and as you may have heard earlier, he's the co-editor of the Canadian Journal of Zoology. He teaches introductory biology, vertebrate biology, and an upper-level course focused on the evolutionary aspects of animal behavior. Aside from the formal teaching duties, he's a strong proponent of bringing science and research to the public by giving talks to schools and nationalist organizations. In 2006, Mark received the Cypress Hills Junior Award from the North American Symposium on Bat Research for outstanding lifetime service and contributions to vegetarian biology. He also received the 2008 Swiss Journal Award from the American Society of Mammalogists for long-term contributions to education about mammalogy. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge all of you in Saskatchewan on 26th territory and the homeland of the BC, which they respect to the First Nations, and indeed, ancestors of this place in the Lutheran are the Wiki of this one. So thank you again, Mark, and let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, now we're gonna go, don't I hate this? Because you don't know if I'm any good. Thank you. And if you just a thought, okay. Thank you for having me. It is not a long drive from Regina. It's a very pleasant drive. And it was actually cool this morning because there was all sorts of black clouds towards Saskatoon, which seemed relevant. And the sunshine was streaming from the mountains, so the fields were all really, really beautiful. So Cassidy asked me to come and give this talk, and one second. She asked me not to talk about it, but today I kind of think that I have to, because there's probably a few of you that are in sleep mode. Not a little late call. I didn't even have to drive, but I woke up to the bad news. So anyway, I'm not going to talk about birds, and I will do my usher bet, not what you do. Okay. I appreciate the fact that you're going to give me 40 or 50 minutes, and I will try to make that a useful slide. So there's a number of things I'm going to say that came out in some of the questions earlier. Or things that came out here. That's what I'm going to talk about. I hope all of these people will be any success that I've had doing research. And not only are they bright and capable and thoughtful, but they're also fun. And I also owe a large debt to my family, my daughter, my son, and my wife, who in a variety of ways, both with humor and without, have supported the things that I've done. So I am very grateful for those both. So what I want to do is I have two themes for this presentation today. The first quarter or so is going to be about some history. I love this. I'd say fully as an aside and intended and incredibly sad to intend this week. I was the head historian of one on this passing day. Fabulous individual. Ever to read the book, the book, published about 20. You'll not hurt yourself by reading one of those volumes and can go lost a lot by reading them. I think it's fair to say that if I didn't become a biology professor, I would have in some way done something with history, because I still love it. And I'm going to talk about some biology. So the history I want to talk about is where this stuff comes. So Cypress Hills, and if you didn't grow up in Saskatchewan, somewhere else in Canada, or maybe even farther afield, Cypress Hills is famous in this country, and for most people, they don't know why. The reason it's famous is that the event that precipitated the formation what we now call the RCMP, capital. In Cypress Hills. There was an interaction, it didn't go well, between the First Nations folks and some people from the United States who were poisoning wolves. Some horses went missing. The wolf poisoners thought that the First Nation folks had stolen them, turned out not to be true, and decided to start shooting. About 30 odd people probably, don't know for sure, but you know they didn't count if they weren't white wolves. And this led to John A. Calvin to decide we needed a police force to keep those folks to the south out of this area and to promote policing. So that event precipitated the formation of the RCMP and the first headquarters of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, at that time called the Northwest Mounted Police, was situated in the Cypress Hills. So it is and was the homeland of a variety of First Nations groups. Although interestingly, none of them actually lived in Cypress Hills. But on Cypress Hills, is a sky island. Glaciers actually went around it, so it's called raised upland. It is the highest location between the Rocky Mountains and Labrador in terms of elevation. It's quite high, the highest point in Saskatchewan, obviously in the Cypress Hills. But it was perceived to be a very dangerous place. There were grizzly bears there until about 1916. There were lots of other things that were scary for Canadian people, so they went into the Cypress Hills to get wood, particular lodgepole pine, to make teepees with, but they didn't live there. Also, one of the last places in Saskatchewan, not the last, but one of the last where there were many three-range bison. So there were also hunting going on there. Well, this is what is called Fort Wolf. It was the original headquarters of the Northwest Mounted Police. This is a reconstruction of what it looked like during the Canadian Centennial Project in the mid-1960s on the location where it was. And you see trees, which are mostly from Saskatchewan as a novelty. And so a very cool place. About 400 meters above the surrounding prairie, considerably wetter, summer is shorter, and I have seen frost in every month, and I have seen snow in almost every month. We'll get more to that. So, in 1873, the Cypress Hills massacre took place, and in 1875, a group of Northwest Mounted Police arrived in the Cypress Hills and started to build its location. The other cool historical feature for anyone who's from the United States, some of you may have heard of the Battle of the Little Big Thing. Probably not familiar in terms of that term to most people, but if you guys say General Custer, any of you will know what that means. He got his backside handed to him rather severely in Wyoming by Sitting Bull and his followers. They killed every single one of the units that Custer was commanding, and then realized, hopefully, this is not going to go well, and so they fled north Canada to get away from the American forces and spent several years at Fort Wolf. Commander Wolf, Sitting Bull became very, very good friends, and eventually, politically, Wolf was forced to get Sitting Bull to go back to the United States. He became as well for him and his followers. So this was in operation for a number of years until the railway went through Maple Creek, at which point it was too far away from communication across Canada, and then was left and abandoned. Although it was used in the 1940s and 60s as what's called a remount station for the Black Family. Now, why do I tell you all this? Well, it's cool, it's standard, but just over the street is this. Established St. Peter of the Grass in 1973. The first member of the biology department at the University of Regina wanted a place to what planting. And it is lots of data sets and trails in Cypress Hills in between the lots of trees. And George Leadingham, who also famous for being first proponent and the person who really drove the formation of Grasslands National Park, off this fuel station established, and he celebrated his 50th birthday a couple years ago with the prospect for renewal. So, we're a kilometer and a half from Fort Walls. Beginning in 1973, with 3 actual trailers glued together. I always refer to it as a field station. Other people would call it something trailers. But I was asked the question here, why do I work in the Cypress Hills? In place for students to stay. So that's the real reason why we started working here. So there were sort of longer periods of time, room for 6 people, and all of it was me. All sorts of cool vistas. And as of this year, I have to really, I perfectly say, here, want to do a study location, there is now a new fuel station that has been built on this site. Well, that's the history part. But there's also some history with biology. So I arrived in Lar in 1990. I tried to get into Cypress Hills for the first time in October of 1990. I was defeated by a snowstorm. So I drove all the way from Regina, back a long drive, but the hill, got within 5 kilometers of the fuel station, couldn't go any further, so I straight around drive over to home. But ever since 1991, have had to working out of the fuel station. This is a card that one of them put together based on a map that was taught the 18th of June, 1993. It was taught near the Battle Creek crossing downstream. This is the Battle Creek crossing, usually not that high, and you have to drive across that to get to the fuel station. I really like that because it keeps ripple out, and no one wants to do that. They taught this back downstream of this crossing. It's usually much shallower, easier to happen. 28 years later, none of that recaptured the station. That's fascinating thing. And encapsulating cool stuff, in my opinion. There's the cover for the heading of the paper that Josh is the first author on. He was supervised by these 2 guys now both work for First Canada, University of Calgary. They were on the right students and stuff. This person was a master's student who was supervisor then, now in University of Alberta. And then 28 years later, we caught this back. Looked in absolute pristine condition. The mail still going strong. And I got to do some really cool things with some of it was respect a horrible process to deal with this particular journal, which gets me to work with a Canadian zoology. So I say again, people, these folks and Hannah, and these different only because they didn't fit in the belong. I'm going to talk about some of the work that they've done in the Cypress Hills over the last 35 years. Okay. And so they get the credit. I just talk about it. So I'm going to talk about 3 different general areas of the church. All to do with that, we will study other things there as well, but selection of habitat, the roost, social interaction, and a little bit about thermoregulation. So, where to back roost? I actually started thinking about this when I was doing my master's in PhD, and some of it with this very so this is called the Big Brown Bat. And in eastern North America, really, really well known as a house. And in bigger cities in Saskatchewan, it's a house bat. But they're not the open. in the Cypress Hills, except for four balls and field stations. It wasn't hard to work out that there were no back in either of those places, but we talked to them about it, but where the root is. And it turns out they are rooted in the cavities of trees, which makes it cool because very few people have ever studied them under natural conditions. So they like big, tall apples. And this leads to another thing, that as a supervisor, it's a little hard, you sometimes have to clean what students to do things that you are incapable of doing. This is not 1/3 time perfect now. No, I'm going to take it. I'm terrified of heights. But if you know it, there is growth and people of those trees. Because we had to try to understand what the cavity, the relative stuff is. I think it's really hard for you to say, look, no, you don't have to put your job there. But it'd be a whole lot better if you did, but I can't do it. Would you please? And a number of my students were willing to do this. So as a result, Katina published this paper on the Journal of Wildlife Management, well, cavity roofing in paper and that, which at the time that was published was actually quite a big flat. Because everyone thought outside, they're really not the place anymore. He did a whole lot of work showing the types of cavities that they would choose. And that spawned a whole lot of work on a variety of species, trying to ask, why do bats use the cavities that they do? And ultimately, why do they move so much? So we did a little work on silver-haired bat. I'll put this in specifically because this is not fun. The student hasn't written that. Trying to encourage them to do that over again, to for them. What they found, silver-haired bat shows many of the same kinds of trees that they practice, although they never do it together. And that they use the same tree regardless of their reproductive position. To put in perspective, for those who don't know a lot about that, big ground is a common Saskatchewan illegal sun brand. Silver-haired bats are migratory, sedentary. We have a trillion in so fairly smaller, but we use many of the same resources. How they sort that out, we really don't know. So as a side project, a PhD student named Craig Gillis, who's now a professor at the University of Winnipeg, studied hoary bats. And the biggest bat, about 5 million. They fly all the way to northern South America, so they enter much farther than one side of me. So they root in the foliage tree, something like this, so the radio transmitter. And Craig set out to try to work out where they roosted and how they treated the structures that they were in. And they do several things that are really quite different. So unlike the ground and silver-haired, they're not cavity roosters, they're foliage roosters. But I'll get to in a minute, big ground and silver-haired change roost about every 2 days or even more common. When these happen, hoary bats roost in brown fruit trees with their walks. And even though there's all kinds of brown and fruit trees, they don't move. They stay in the same place. Day after day after day. You still don't understand. So what's this? And so the question became, what are they getting out of these sites? Well, Craig worked out that almost always they were facing where the sun comes up, or naked sun comes. Warm them up. And the other thing about where they roosted compared to the opposite side of the tree, where it's open, you get a wind speed when the sun is low. So they are exposed to where there's a wind and got morning sun. And then darkening it to the well, this is for thermoregulation. These are females with their pups, and they're spending less energy to keep themselves warm or get warm than they would otherwise. So even though they've got a plethora of places to choose, they choose sheltered, paper branches. which have lower feet, probably the thermoregulation reason, and Johnson, W6, figured it out totally and drew us the perfect picture of Craig looking at the trees with the bats roosting in the foliage. Just recently, doing him a blanking, actually put radio transmitters on the little brown bat, which are now endangered in Canada due to the disease called white nose syndrome, a fungal disease that has killed many millions of these bats. Just reaching Saskatchewan, little browns are another bat that's supposed to be a house bat. That's the perfect place to work because there aren't any buildings. Although little browns haven't read the literature, didn't spend all their time in food cavities. Females especially, but also males sometimes recently enter the photogenic structures. A horse farm was a little bit of favorite. But what Hannah found is that females, much more likely to be building, although they live in trees. Males, much less likely to be building, commonly in trees. And they hadn't read the work by Martina L. Shelby, who said, oh, that Peter Cavity used to that. Because we asked them, what were the cavities? Yeah. They're looking underneath bark and things, the first two. So they're choosing different ways. And then finally, I like to interject stories. Remember coming out of the top at the North American Baptist, whatever, a forester, southern US, I've done yet another talk about the choice of various cavities by that. Not put it in perspective at all, not talk about the big picture. And I remember grousing to Martina that we needed someone to do a review of this. And she said, I'll do it. So she did a meta-analysis of 56 studies about types of roosts that bats used. Basically found that they like tall trees with big DBHs, open canopies so that sun hits them, with lots of dead trees around and relatively close to water. We concluded from that that therefore processes that get open trees have to be good. So a little bit about the types of structures that bats use that will leak over into talking about zoning. So the thing is, was basically the first ever study of bats using natural tree habitat. It has now exploded a lot of people that have done similar work. You can see that bat trees in Canada, the bat trees in Australia, the species of trees are different. The attributes of very different. I think that's what we need. From a social behavior point of view, there are costs and benefits to living in groups. The group benefits from your ground boxes of that. You all have to come forward. But you have to be forced to other individuals. You might be carrying demons. What? You might not have had a shower this morning, etc. Or it might not be legally banned. All those things can happen. The groups are so good. But there's also benefits. You're in a group, thermoregulation may be a bit easier. You don't get able to huddle with therapy. You might have benefits from avoiding predators if you're in a group. Possibilities for transfer of information about foraging sites, all other things. Maybe even some cooperative breeding. Not to suggest that all these things happen, but there are reasons that you get groups, and likely those reasons will decline in their benefit. So there's going to be probably an inappropriate colony size. It's part of Craig Willis's PhD. He did the side project in hoary bat, so he actually studied cavities in the big ground from a social PhD and discovered something about that everybody reported before, namely they undergo something called fusion. Something more in a second. Basically, the way it works is you have some red bats in one tree and some blue bats in another. They go out at night and forage, and the next day you have red bat and blue bat in different trees with different residues. So fusion refers to the idea that the social cohesion between groups of animals. It happens in whales, a number of other animals. Vision reflects the fact that these bats switch roots very often. I remember reading a paper when I was in master's, a review of why bats switch roots. The review is still totally relevant, we still don't know the answer why bats switch roots. But they do it a lot. They use the roots to multiple species. And they have to walk the potential roots on one stage. And Craig showed quite clearly, and I'll get to this in a second, that the local fidelity. So in an area, I think lots of trees, move between all kinds of things, they stay in the same area, and go different places for 2 months. Well, this is vision fusion. So a map of part of the Cypress Hills. The red dotted line right here, you got 3 problems. Four galaxies up there. So this is just too far away. Craig, with a whole bunch of radio tracking, found that big brown bat that is stopped all along this street, roots it in, roots in area 1, roots in area 2, roots in area 3. So there are very few bats that we can ever figure out in places in between. All of these areas, although we got to know these are the one best, have lots of different habits. And we could never find any evidence that any bat went between them. And so that kind of thing is only a couple of kilometers, not very far. No movement between, and they switch rooms every 1.7 days. And so they're moving between trees all the time. He did a couple quite cool experiments to show that they were loyal to these local areas. He caught 4 bats in root area 3, 4 bats in root area 1, but radio transmitters on both, and then moved it to a cavity in the opposite. Next day, right back home. Did not stay. And further, a group of 3 individuals kept for another purpose overwintered in the lab at the university, caught them in August, returned them in May, let them go right here, to the root area 1. Next morning, they had been staying free, we caught them each month. And so you know it's free on this one thing. They know they're already one back, they're already free zone. They don't move, which is really kind of cool. So a number of attributes about roost switching. One thing that, one more that Julia Kilger found is that when you learn possible roost, is that you actually meet more friends. So I should have said, I think really using the total field fast I feel. Most of you probably have a system of home morning, what communicates to everyone. So every morning, you're with the same people. And then we're supposed to go to the class, people that give the science classes, and often you wouldn't be with the same people much at all for the up you. Every day, you have to have room. And they had these group of people in Europe, and was always with a whole bunch of people that you didn't meet with. Some of the friends, some of the time, and some of the classes, often when we didn't meet you. Julia showed more roost switching you did, the more close roost mates you seem to have. So, go to different kinds of classes, and maybe when I show this from shop, you can look at what they do in different people that you might have. This led us to ask the question, all right, they switch roots, they turn up with roost mates all the time. Obvious question is this family that's to live a long time. 28-year-old women, you know, big brown that live for at least 20 years in the yellows. Our thinking has always been that mother, daughter, granddaughter stay together for long periods of time. So we want to be able to, well, we need a whole bunch of relatives and they'll stick together. So 2 lines of evidence that suggest that this is not. Craig devised and called a roost sharing index. So each of these bars represents a pair of individuals and how often they root together. And what this graph suggests is some graphs that root together fairly frequently. That was your best like chemistry, biology, English, and algebra. And then when some pairs that almost are never together. That was you and the guy who went to shop, all those things together. Okay, so what Craig wanted to ask is there a genetic relationship with relationships? Are these much more genetic relatives? You don't say. Other way that we looked at this was a master's student, Jackie Matheny. She would catch a whole bunch of that out of a group and then measure the genetic relationship within that group of them. So we have pairs and groups. In terms of pair wise related, and this is about 15 years old now. It's based on microsatellites. Where they can all be now in a museum somewhere. But basic point was, on average, it's very closely related to the individual. There was certainly no relationship between how much time they spend in groups together and how related to it. So nothing there about one. If we do a randomization test of different groups, same groups, genetic relationship. So who you roost with does not appear to be driven by relatedness. Likewise, in Jackie's analysis of groups, he taught over the course of her 2 summers in Cypress Hills, 20 different groups that he could analyze that of, and only in 2 cases was there any significant deal with relatedness, and in other cases, none. So the conclusion, meaning not driving the groups of individuals that you are roosting them. Okay? So, why are certain individuals together? Still don't know the answer to that question. Kristen Bondo arrived to do a roosting project, and we had an actually fortunate event happen, which role for research in some way. And it was neat that he arrived after Craig left, and we always blame Craig for what happened. Roosting area 1 top, these are all the trees that we need. And what we found is between 2004, when Craig left, and 2007, consistently something, about 46% of the trees that we used as roots either fell down or came on the village. We always said it was graceful that he climbed to these fruit. Because now it's still difficult. The guys that lived here slowly over these 2 years moved to the new what's starting to belong to this. It's one about here. Much smaller area, again, on density of trees. And so as far as we can tell, up to 2004, if there was a fact you can roost down here, we never tracked it. It did not know them. So it seems to have been totally novel, given that roofs were falling down up here, and you'd expect them to have been stored, that there's not a renewal. And we were lucky that we seemed to get it. So it led Kristen to ask questions about what kind of cavity are they actually looking for. And these asking trees, we identified 3 different cavity types. A tree with a single hole, or a tree with multiple holes, whether it be from sapsuckers or injuries or fungus or whatever. And then some trees probably fireflies at the back. Okay, so maybe there's differences in cavity types that the bats are choosing when they move to this new area. So what Kristen did was a whole lot of walking and looked at 361 trees of the appropriate size, of the appropriate type, whole bunch of workers. Both in RA1, 2, and 3, and RA4. And he found just by looking, 33 with cavities. Very few had cracks. Very few had multiple cavities. Most of them had single coats. Okay? So that was available on landscape based on conserving and finding 33 on present. He was then able to go back and look at all the trees that he tracked back to all those roots that we identified, and lo and behold, the relationship is quite different. Relatively few species would say that maybe more than like again, something that are significantly so with cracks. And then if you added up the number of days based on it, you got even more. The trees with cracks were much preferred to how often they occurred on the landscape. Why? Well, a simple reason might be there's more room inside. These are like 4-bedroom houses, not single family dwellings with one bedroom. So measuring volume suggested that cracks had much more space inside, and not surprisingly, more volume means more house. So the average exit must be the number of times leaving trees with a greater volume cavity over what kind of work has more of that. So it suggests that a cavity is not a cavity is not a cavity. Furthermore, there were differences in what was inside that cavity. Cavities that were occupied by that versus those you could never tell were used by that. We measured the temperature when there was nothing in the form. And that used cavity had to be warm. Again, significantly so. And also, you did exit count more of that when the cavities were warmer. Having height, having size, having temperature. All seem to matter in which ones the bats use. And finally, turning it directly into energetics, we know based on the caloric ordinance, the root size increases that way of the puddle, the thermoregulatory point of view, and their resting metabolic rate goes down. And this translates into about 1.5 grams of these per day. Or they don't have to eat based on the savings of that. It is a habit. So it may simply be an energetic reason that bats are grouping together, but it also may be they can be with more of their friends in bigger cavities. So a few other things that came out of this. Aaron Gillen, who came to my lab at the postdoc, looked at social cavities. The other one, the same order. There was something first, and she found the statistics that I couldn't possibly explain, that big brown bats left root in a particular order. And so there were certain individuals that always were near the front, but individuals always near the back. We don't know precisely why, and I also should say that it wasn't done in the Cypress Hills. These are based on data in Fort Collins, Colorado, from a giant rabies study. But coming out of this, another colleague found that if you compare the way big brown bats build his roost in Fort Collins versus the free roost we had in the Cypress Hills, but from a disease point of view, building the bad place in RV based on full calculation, the pathogens would spread 4 times faster. Building this with that, and they would improve health system. So, from a white nose syndrome, roosting in trees may be a good way to slow down the spread of disease. And then the final thing that I will talk about from a social behavior point of view was prompted by techniques like this. And it's actually hard to find these things. But we all do it. The next time you drive through Regina, if there's an unfortunate car accident, what do you do? Slow down and be still. Huh? We're always drawn bad stuff to that. So they're all staring at this car accident. The law's been held, whether it's a myth or not, it's what we decided to test. But the best way to test back is that all you do is test one. Put it in the bag next to the net. Every time you walk past the bag, you touch it. Make it more. Take the breath. And if rather than be attracted to you, have more. And it's not easy for you. It's harder, much of this, and you've heard of it, and stuff. You just got angry a bit. So this led to Hannah Wilson asking the question, how do bats in the Cypress Hills respond to alarm calls? Now, I just use this slide to get me to say alarm call. Now this is alarm call from hoary bat, silver-haired bat, little brown bat, big brown bat. So she did a playback experience. It's one quality forever. She played back alarm calls and TV plays, echolocation calls, and things that what that's doing in coding and spread. You see how that has the same intelligence respond. Expecting that hoary bats and silver-haired bats probably do similar things, so that if you play back a feeding buzz of the silver-haired bat, hoary bat can come roaring and then try to take that mom. If you play a distress call of a little brown bat, which is 1/5 the size, hoary bat might compete and so we thought that they would respond. Correct call and the feeding buzzes can only where to go. The results actually totally surprising. There is virtually no response to panic. And I think it's really cool that this is an open part of animal behavior, it's not animal behavior, and it's basically negative results, which means you never worry about whether the policy is correct or not. And it certainly wasn't in Hannah's case, but very cool. In terms of diet, PhD student Dana Green recently published a paper using stable isotopes showing how closely silver-haired forward and a little around that diet overlap. Forward that from the situation of the little rounds, having smaller things, having more quality effects. Silver-haired and hoary overlap a lot, which reinforces why we were surprised by Hannah's results. And we've also done a little bit of cortisol work, the stress hormone, and there does seem to be quite substantial differences between species in circulating cortisol levels. This is more descriptive biology. We don't really know the reason, but. And then the final thing I'd say about social behavior for the students in the audience is that it doesn't always work. We got a contract from Environment Canada for $180,000 to use what we term sky antenna to look at how that move around the environment. The story is cool because we got the idea from a former U of R student who owner there actually worked as a cook for a field cook that I offered at the field station. Has gone on to be a salmon biologist at the University of Regina. And he uses antennas that they fit like this underwater to detect salmon like up and down stream. So, he thought, okay, but let's use the same system. So inside the PVC tubing, it's a really heavy copper cable that detects actively degraded transformer metals. Ideally, that's not to be going through it or close to it. You'll have to move it back to the fitment up and down the stream. So it's going to kind of here, we built 6 of them, spent a vast fortune of money on but buying equipment. Never worked. Didn't detect a single bat, probably because they fly too quick and they couldn't pick up the signal. So don't let anyone ever give the impression research always works. It's hard, and that's why not everyone can do it. And then finally, a little bit about thermoregulation. So I've showed some nice pictures of the Cypress Hills. That's the 15th of June in 1990. We used cardboard boxes and toboggan down the hill from the field. Okay? What do you do if you eat insects and you're in the Cypress Hills? What's that? Well, purely fortuitously, Craig was there, and this is what Ford got. The straight line is ambient temperature. The dotted line is that skin temperature measured by a radius thermometer. This is a little later in June after the snowstorm, but when it was still very cold. And these three individuals in different years were equally in the conditions, all went into short-term hibernation after migrating because it says in the summer. Temperature got warmer, they came out of hibernation, and all three females immediately gave birth to sparks. The argument was that hibernation wasn't only good to save immunity, it prevented fertilization. And they didn't return to pups, which then would be harder to keep warm than if they were in the mother's full of. So I got and all three of these individuals immediately gave birth as soon as hibernation was over after those events. And a little bit of evidence that big brown bat treats buildings in three different ways. Joey Rintoul studied big brown pregnant and lactating females in buildings on the slopes outside of Cypress Hills and roofing in trees. And the buildings may not be the best for some reason, but from a corporate point of view, building roofing bat spent significantly less time, especially for lactating individuals in corporate when they roofed in buildings, and the duration, or sorry, the depth of how deep they went in corporate much more than the roofing. So big brown bats certainly improve differently in they treat buildings, probably due to the inside temperature. And then the final thing I want to talk about is a recent focus of research, and that is heat. I've suggested a number of times here, the other routes are better. For the previous that is used commonly, there's more that use other them, but with climate change, heat is going to become a category of problem. So on that note, the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship comes from South Africa, where he studies heat, stress, and passing birds, and we can then think of handle things with heat. And so he looked at heat stress when there's heat of that in Cypress Hills, and noted that the temperature which these three species could cope with, around silver bears and hoary bats, was very different. Okay? Hoary bats, the bat that moves outside the tree in foliage, is able to deal with much higher temperatures than the bat, little brown bat, that are on its foliage and Now, this is one place I'm going to talk about birds for a second. The best area focus the heat, nightjars, African nightjars, and focus with 56 sitting on the ground. The heat bath of Kansas, relatively speaking, but still 46, 47 is not horrible. How do they do it? Up to about 40 degrees. What they do is they let their body temperature increase a little bit. Then they start seriously evaporating water. Fine, and not water water. And the best at evaporating water is in fact a little bit of that. That means it runs faster, more, heat. Silver hairs and hoary bats evaporate water and stay cooler, more easily, and thus probably cope with higher temperatures. I won't show any data, but we've repeated this study for big brown bats and Yuma bats in a place called Willowette, British Columbia, which is the hottest place in Canada during the heat dome in 2021. It started at 48 degrees in Willowette, and there had evidence to show that big brown bats will die in flat houses. So which ones they're going to be not and we think we have evidence to show that they do, females in particular, to have their pups grow quickly. So I hope I've shown you what I think are cool things that are going on in the Cypress Hills. Moving from various climatic conditions from a couple of trailers, and we had painted green so you couldn't see it from this fort wall, to the revitalization that's going on, making it look quite different. Thank you for coming, and really thank you for the opportunity to tell you a little bit. It's been incredibly enjoyable. Happy to answer any questions at this time. Thank you for not letting the team get the best. You can be up late last night, and I thank you for having me. That's it. Yeah. The vast majority of my person on email, but they're often